the early 2000s, handling Linux wasn't easy at all. The lack of compatible hardware and the hostility of those primitive installers made installing the system something only experts could do. Rare cult-like enthusiasts who waited for magazines with install CDs, printing out guides in secret, often mooching off the office printer. Come on, let's admit it. It's been over 20 years, the statute of limitations has passed. We can all come clean now. We were all guilty and rebellious. I remember those days with deep nostalgia. I loved tinkering with my computer, and one day, maybe, I'll tell you the story of the special person who introduced me to Linux, a true pioneer. To be honest, I started using Linux more out of love for that person than out of pleasure for the system itself. Because let's face it, Linux back then was rough and definitely not user-friendly. Even basic tasks like setting up an internet connection or a printer could take days of trial and error. There was a lot of buzz in the community, a sense of growth. Thanks to the rise of the Penguin on servers, Linux was gaining popularity. But something was missing. It was taking root, but it lacked vision. Because the things that seem obvious to us today weren't obvious at all when they first had to be conceived. And then in 2004, people started whispering about a South African billionaire who had sold his encryption software company for certificate management, made a fortune, and now wanted to bet everything on Linux. Mark Shuttleworth, a charismatic, eccentric figure, the first African in space who paid for his own trip on a Soyuz rocket. And then he decided to launch into Linux. What a story. The name? Ubuntu. A name that, just by hearing it, made you curious about what it meant. And yes, by now we all know it, and we've heard it so many times that I refuse to repeat it even in this video 20 years later. But that name, that sound, it conveyed something new. A light, an energy, an enthusiasm no other distribution had ever shown before. The slogan said it all: Linux for human beings. Finally, our eccentric billionaire founded Canonical, the company that would support Ubuntu. He poured in millions, hired the best developers around, many of whom were already Debian developers, and built Ubuntu directly on top of Debian. A brilliant decision. It created a natural synergy, a direct bridge between the two distributions. Ubuntu wasn't just a project. It was a vision of the future brought into the present. It was everything we'd always wanted, finally real. There was Wubi, the easiest graphical installer of its time, which booted directly from a live CD. There was the legendary free shipping service, which sent physical Ubuntu CDs to anyone in the world who asked, free of charge. There was the clear rhythm of 6-month releases, the introduction of LTS versions, and consistent naming and style. Ubuntu, whether you like it or not, was, and still is, a milestone in Linux desktop history. There is a story before Ubuntu, and after Ubuntu, and that's what makes this story even sadder. In just a few years, or maybe not even years, maybe just months, Ubuntu became the most popular GNU Linux distribution in the world. Everyone talked about it, everyone wanted it, many hated it. Ubuntu wasn't just on everyone's lips, it was installed and running on everyone's hard drive. With its iconic brown tones and its quirky animal code names, Dapper Drake, Feisty Fawn, Edgy Eft, each new release felt like an event. There are no official statistics, but I'm confident I'm not exaggerating when I say that at one point, over 60% of all Linux desktop installations on the planet were Ubuntu. The community exploded. National forums were booming. Users, guides, packages, support. If there was a problem, there was a guide for Ubuntu. If there was software, it was already packaged for Ubuntu. The potential? It wasn't just huge. It was immense. And just at the moment when all it needed was one final step to solidify everything, the leg breaks. And the dream comes to an end. Forever. In 2010, while Ubuntu 10.04 Lucid Linux was still shining with the beloved Genome 2, Canonical made an announcement that would radically change the trajectory of the distribution. In October, they introduced Unity, a new graphical interface initially designed for netbooks but destined to become Ubuntu's official desktop face. The goal was ambitious: to create a consistent user experience across every type of device, from desktop to mobile. But behind that move lurked a deep rupture with the community. Around the same time, GNOME was preparing for its bold leap to version 3, a radical shift in desktop philosophy. Canonical disagreed. Instead of following the path set by the community, They rejected GNOME Shell and decided to go their own way, a decision that, for many, was the first clear sign of a well-known developer syndrome, the infamous "not invented here." If we didn't make it, it's not good enough. In 2011, with the release of Ubuntu 11.04, Unity officially became the default interface, and the reaction was immediate. On one hand, excitement for the innovation attempt. On the other, frustration over the lack of dialogue. For many longtime users, it was a shock. Canonical was forcing a vision without listening to its base. And so began a slow diaspora. Linux Mint rejected Unity and created Cinnamon. Others moved to Fedora, Debian, Arch. It was the first tangible sign that something was cracking. And then came the final blow. In 2012, with Ubuntu 12.10, Canonical decided to integrate a sponsored Amazon feature directly into the dash. Nothing wrong with it, in theory. But to do that, the system forwarded all local search queries to Canonical's servers, even when users were simply searching for files on their own machine. The backlash was fierce. Richard Stallman called Ubuntu spyware. For the first time, the project that had branded itself as Linux for human beings was now being accused of violating the trust of those very beings. Canonical tried to downplay it, then added an option to disable the feature. But the damage was done. The narrative had cracked, suspicion had crept in, and part of the community no longer saw Canonical as a guide, but as something to be defended against. By 2013, Canonical's strategy of isolation became clear. While the rest of the Linux world was converging on Systemd as the new init standard, Canonical kept pushing its own upstart and isolated an alternative solution. That same year they announced Mir, a new display server meant to replace X11. But instead of adopting Wayland, which was already being embraced by Fedora, OpenSUSE, and Debian, Canonical once again chose to go solo. The message was unmistakable. Canonical wasn't collaborating anymore. It was building its own kingdom, a closed kingdom with proprietary technologies in an ecosystem that had always thrived on open collaboration and sharing. Between 2014 and 2016, Mark Shuttleworth poured himself into a new challenge: convergence. The idea? A single graphical interface for desktop, tablet, and smartphone. Ubuntu Touch was born, then Ubuntu Phone, and intense work began on Unity 8, the universal interface. It was a noble dream, but the outcome was a disaster. The desktop was neglected, Unity became unstable, bloated, inconsistent. Ubuntu Phone hit the market on a few marginal devices, largely ignored. And in the meantime, Canonical introduced Snap, a new packaging format. Open in theory, but in practice entirely controlled by Canonical. Only the official Snap store could be used. No other distribution could host its own Snap repository. Once again, the message was clear. Centralize, manage, control, even if the language remained that of open source. And so, in 2017, came the surrender. In a post as calm as it was devastating, Shuttleworth announced the end of Unity 8, the Mir desktop project, and Ubuntu Phone. Ubuntu would return to GNOME. The desktop was no longer a priority. Canonical's future would be in the cloud, in servers, in IoT. That's how the dream ended. The dream of a human, elegant, visionary Linux desktop. Unity, which was supposed to be a symbol of progress, had become the symbol of a fracture. Amazon Lens shattered trust. Upstart and Mir isolated Ubuntu technically. Snap sealed the deal. A closed solution in a community that preaches openness. And when Ubuntu returned to GNOME in 2017, the message was clear. Even to the last hopeful users, Canonical had let go, and perhaps had betrayed. After the collapse of the Unity dream, the failure of Ubuntu Phone, and the abandonment of the one interface for all vision, Canonical found itself facing the mirror. And what it saw was no longer a romantic project, but a company that had to face the numbers. Years of development wasted, no economic return, a fractured community, trust broken. Ubuntu was still installed everywhere, yes, but its magic had faded. And meanwhile, the world around it was changing fast. The cloud had become the new El Dorado of computing. Companies were looking for scalable solutions, containers, orchestration, and commercial support. Red Hat was thriving thanks to its hybrid model, open source software plus paid support contracts. And Canonical? It looked around with fewer and fewer illusions. The desktop didn't bring in revenue, it only brought costs. And so a new mantra emerged: enterprise first. Canonical decided to go all in on servers, cloud, and IoT. Ubuntu didn't disappear from the desktop, but it was no longer a priority. It became a showcase, a front door, a business card, but not the heart of the strategy anymore. That heart now beat in the data center. During those years, Canonical had publicly expressed its intention to go public. Mark Shuttleworth openly talked about the IPO, initial public offering, as a necessary step to become a major tech company. But then in 2018, something unexpected happened. Shuttleworth canceled everything and took full control of the company back. The truth? Canonical wasn't ready, or better yet, it wasn't profitable enough. And as we all know, the financial market has little patience for long-term visions. You don't go public with hope, you go public with margins. Going public means exposing yourself, making your financials public, ensuring constant growth, and above all, proving that the business model works. But Canonical was still on shaky ground. The desktop didn't generate direct profit. Projects like Unity, Mir, and Ubuntu Phone had been costly and failed. The pure open source model was incompatible with the logic of finance, which demands control and centralization. And so came the definitive shift. No more dreams, no more romanticism. Canonical became an enterprise-first company. It simplified its internal structure, restructured teams, invested in Kubernetes, OpenStack, hybrid cloud, and pushed heavily into integration with Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft. Ubuntu landed on WSL, Windows subsystem for Linux. Ubuntu on Windows, but not as a desktop, as a terminal, a developer tool, an embedded server environment. A strategic compromise, but also a clear signal. The traditional desktop was no longer central. In parallel, Snap became the beating heart of Canonical's new vision, a universal sandbox packaging format designed to work on any system. In theory, a great innovation. In practice, a centralized closed system controlled exclusively by Canonical. The backend, the Snap store, is a single entity. No other distribution can host its own Snap repository. If you want to use Snap, you have to go through Canonical. The irony is obvious. The company that once spoke of freedom was now building a vendor lock-in model, not unlike Apple or Microsoft. The community responded. Debian didn't adopt it. Fedora rejected it. Linux Mint even blocked it by default. Snap became a symbol of the rift, modern technology, but without trust. Canonical was no longer the hero of the Linux desktop. It wasn't even the heart of open source. It was just a company trying to survive and grow, like any other. It made choices, hard ones, sometimes cynical. It let go of its idealistic battles to chase economic sustainability, and maybe it had no other choice. But one thing is certain, Ubuntu is no longer what it once was. It went from Linux for human beings to Linux for corporations. It stopped being a shared dream and became a corporate platform. Meanwhile, Fedora, Debian, Arch, and Linux Mint regained ground on the desktop. And Canonical? It's chasing a cloud market where it lacks the strength and the ecosystem to truly compete with giants like Red Hat. The train had passed, and Canonical didn't get on. Canonical held the keys to the kingdom. For at least 5 years, Ubuntu was the public face of Linux. It was everywhere. It was the benchmark. It was the symbol of a quiet revolution that truly could have changed the fate of free software on the desktop. And yet, instead of solidifying that power, Canonical chose a different path. A path made of technical isolation, top-down decisions, and visionary dreams that were never truly understood or shared. And when things started to fall apart, they dismantled everything. They closed up, changed strategy, and chased a market that had never truly been waiting for them. But what could they have done? Really, Unity, Upstart, Mir, Snap, all projects created to replace things that already existed. Canonical could have joined the development of Genome 3, helped make it more accessible, more elegant. They could have collaborated on System D, on Wayland, instead of creating alternate solutions doomed to oblivion. They could have done what the open source world does best, join forces. Ubuntu had a graphical app store as early as 2010, long before it became standard in tech. If Canonical had continued down that path, with openness, standardization, and collaboration, we might have today a cross-platform Linux store, open and federated. They could have used Flatpak, AppImage, or even Snap, but open to everyone. Instead, they chose to close it off, and they missed the chance to become the Steam of open-source software. Ubuntu was perfect for entering schools, universities, public institutions. It didn't take much, just a plan. Simplified versions, training courses, institutional agreements, teacher training. It could have become the educational standard across Europe. But it didn't. It looked the other way. Unity, Amazon Lens, Snap, all top-down decisions made without debate, without transparency. And yet, Ubuntu's strength had always been in its base: passionate users, overflowing forums, contributions from around the world. Canonical could have opened up, created a participatory decision-making process, truly involved those who used and loved Ubuntu. Instead, it decided alone and lost everyone. Does the desktop not generate profit? Maybe, but it brings something more valuable: visibility, user trust, identity control. It's thanks to the desktop that Apple dominates. It's through the interface that brands define who they are. Canonical could have integrated desktop and services, offered complete personal solutions, pre-configured Nextcloud, automatic backups, collaborative open suites. They could have created a real personal open ecosystem, but they stopped believing in it. They centralized, they locked it down, they chased a market too late where others were already ahead. They betrayed the dream of a Linux for human beings in pursuit of a business that never truly embraced them. Canonical didn't have to choose between community and business. They could have had both, just like Red Hat, just like SUSE is trying to do. But they got the timing wrong, the tone wrong, the method wrong. And today, while Ubuntu survives as a container base, as a subsystem in Windows, as a cloud-friendly distro, no one sees it anymore as a symbol of change. Ubuntu changed the history of free software, no doubt about it. It brought Linux to millions. It taught people how to install it, how to use it, how to believe in it. But its trajectory has been that of a brilliant rise and a silent decline. A dream lit by a visionary space traveler, slowly turning into an aging manager of a small tech company in a London office. A revolution that, in the end, adapted to the existing order. And who knows? Maybe one day someone will take that spark again, that light we saw in 2004, and decide to carry it forward. But this time, all the way.